All right. Here's a little video that we're going to record looking at the historical sources module, turn of the century feminism. This module also feeds into the exam. One of the short answer questions addresses Mueller v. Oregon. It's a Supreme Court case that, let's just jump to the general information here. All right, Supreme Court case. 1908 is when it is decided. This comes from the OregonEncyclopedia.org. I just took their text directly. And what happened is in Oregon, the Oregon legislature passed a law that limited the amount of hours that women could work because women were mothers, and if they worked too much, then that was bad for their children and therefore bad for America. This is an example of reform that comes out of the progressive era. And it's a gain for women. And in 1908, the Supreme Court rules that it rules that the Oregon law restricting the hours that women work is indeed constitutional, that the state can do that. And the reason they decide that the state can do that is because there's a compelling interest for women and children. All right, so this first little window in the historical sources is background from Mueller v. Oregon. You should read that. The next is the Brandeis brief. Brandeis is a lawyer who argues in support of the Oregon law. He says that women should indeed be protected. There's a couple key things about the Brandeis brief. One, it prevails. The Supreme Court agrees with Louis Brandeis. And the other thing is that it brings in what we call sociological jurisprudence. So in the Brandeis brief, went too far. In the Brandeis brief, they rely on all kinds of different scholarly studies looking at the impact of hours on women, laundries, bad effect on health, on safety, on morals, and there's all this data that Brandeis presents to the Supreme Court. Previous to sociological jurisprudence, it was believed that the Supreme Court should only rule on matters of law and not really consider how the law impacts individuals. It's a big change. It's the world we live in now. The Supreme Court considers how the law impacts individuals. And really importantly, sociological jurisprudence is crucial in the way the Supreme Court decides the decision of Brown versus Board of Education. So there's a connection between this Brandeis brief and later arguments made in the movement to abolish Jim Crow and abolish segregated schooling. You don't have to look at the whole Brandeis brief, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, then the next thing we have is a secondary source written by a scholar, written by Nancy Cott. It's published in the Journal of American History. This comes out in 1984. And it looks specifically at feminist politics in the 1920s. And then the National Women's Party. The National Women's Party is sort of a second wave feminism. So there's a group of women starting with the Seneca Falls Declaration in 1848 that want suffrage. But they also argue that women are different than men, that women are mothers, and that's part of the reason that they need some of these protections, why they need some of the special notifications of the law. The National Women's Party comes along and says women need equal rights, and this causes friction between traditional feminists and the new wave of feminists, 1920s new wave of feminists. So pay close attention to this secondary source because it really helps us understand, finally, the Equal Rights Amendment, which was first drafted in 1921 by Alice Paul. And what does it say? It says, equality of rights shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on account of sex. That's it. What does that mean? That would mean that the Oregon law that said women are different because they're mothers, that law can't hold anymore because now we can't discriminate based on sex. It's a real kind of sticky issue. Are men and women different? Are men and women the same? Should the law treat men and women different, or should it treat them the same? We still haven't quite figured this out in this country, although I think most of us would agree that we should treat men and women the same. We should not discriminate. But the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed. It was introduced in 1921. It came very close to passing in the 70s, but it didn't come through. So, what I want you guys to do, take this quiz, of course. Well, it will be available. It's not available for you right now because I'm recording this video early. But anyway, take the quiz when you're all said and done with this. Think about how women changed what they wanted from the federal government over time. It's a sticky situation, right? It's tricky. It's kind of hard to wrap our little brains around. So that's what I'd like you to do with this. And also, for the exam, you'll have an opportunity potentially to discuss the changes that occurred in feminist thinking from the 1880s to the 1920s. All right, I think I'm going to call this thing over. It's a shorter little video, but good enough. I've laid out some of the points, and by all means, read this secondary source, this primary source, this secondary source, and this primary source. All right, I hope that makes sense. Have lots of fun out there, and I'll just say peace.